All right. Welcome to GitOps the Planet. I am your host, as always, Dan Garfield. I am the co-founder and chief open source officer of CodeFresh. Today, I have a special treat. This is somebody that I've worked with for the last year and a half now. Really it's been a marvelous experience because his name is Michael Crenshaw, and he's quickly become the most prolific contributor to Argo CD. So without further ado, let me add you, Michael. Welcome to GitOps the Planet.
Hey, Dan. Thanks for having me.
So I think today we're going to talk about building Argo, the experience of contributing to Argo, working on Argo CD. And first off, I actually want to embarrass you just a little bit. So Michael comes to us from Intuit, as everybody knows. And if I'm looking at the PRs reviewed and merged over the last year, you outshine all other reviewers. You have over almost 1,100 pull requests merged this last year, which is actually over 3 times more than the next nearest contributor. Not that I wanted to, wouldn't take anything away from everybody else. It's a team effort. Everybody works on this stuff. But not only that, I was also looking at, I think I actually tweeted something about this earlier, but I was looking at the contributions overall. And you joined us just before the end of 2022 from Intuit and exploded and have been the most prolific contributor. You've actually contributed now more code lines than anyone else to the project. You've done it just in the last year and a half. You're not quite breaking number one on commits just yet, but I suspect that if we give you a few more months, you'll be number one pretty rapidly. So pretty amazing. And what do you have to say for yourself?
Well, I'll start with you need to do my annual review for me. The second thing is I'll undercut myself a little bit on the line count. A lot of that was a feature. We now do like sneak scans for all of our images and release assets. And a lot of those are just lines from HTML files. So, but it counts, I guess.
Yeah, it still counts. Yeah, it still counts. And I was actually going to ask you, so within Intuit, so I don't know how it works at Intuit. At CodeFresh, we have several Argo project maintainers, but all of us work on Argo. We kind of work on like CodeFresh stuff, and then we have stuff that we go and work on for Argo. We set some time aside every week, but none of us are like 100% dedicated. It's not like any of us have like, I'm going to wake up in the morning, I'm going to work on Argo, I'm going to work on Argo all day, and then I'm going to finish the day working on Argo. What's your time? How's Intuit set up with you and others? Because I know a lot of other Intuit contributors work a lot on other stuff, and so just seeing how prolific you've been, I've thought, is Michael just dedicated to Argo CD? Is that why he's so prolific? Or maybe it's just your workflow is more efficient than the rest of us?
Well, I came into Intuit at kind of a unique time. So first, I'm on a unique team. Intuit has a lot of folks who contribute to open source, but I think that the Argo team is uniquely geared towards keeping the Argo products moving. And I came in at a unique time because Intuit, several folks had just moved on from the Argo team, and Intuit wanted to sort of rebuild their expertise pool. So I was a part of that group that came in and basically spent like 6 months just doing open source Argo CD stuff. All of the internal things that needed to be handled, other folks picked up the slack. And they wanted me to have just that time to get up to speed. I think a third reason why I guess the numbers make it appear that I'm maybe more prolific than some of the earlier devs who are still like high up there in contributions. A lot of those earlier contributions were like really core pieces that now I get to just tweak. So there's a lot of maintenance work that is just merging small bug fix PRs. So I get to inflate my numbers that way a little bit.
that helps, I suppose. And had you worked on other open source projects before this?
Quite a long time ago. In high school, I worked on a project that was designed to help like Ubuntu Linux users who didn't have a steady internet connection do dependency resolution. Like on an online computer, pull down all the Debian files they need, and then move it to an offline computer. And I worked on that for about a year and a half. It was a relatively small Python project, but I learned to love open source there.
Yeah, I always think my first open source contribution, and it wasn't even on GitHub, it was on like SourceForge, was somebody was working on porting Quake to HTML5. And they had like a bug in the startup command, and I like contributed like the fix to the startup commit. It was like the smallest thing, but it was like, then anybody that talked about it or played it, I was like, yeah, I contributed to that. No big deal. And that's like such a cool, like, wow, like I got to work on this thing that suddenly, everybody uses. And of course, Argo is much more prolific and, is really relied on by so many companies, so many teams, between Google and Tesla and everybody else on the list. So I find it enormously satisfying to be able to contribute to this project. For you coming in, so we're gonna talk about Argo 2.7, what's new in Argo 2.7. We're gonna talk about what's new in the project, but I wanted to kind of get some unique perspectives from you about coming into the project, and if you were talking to people who were just getting interested in contributing to Argo CD, what advice would you give to help them get oriented more quickly?
Sure. So starting with sort of getting folks onboarded to the project, Argo CD is a uniquely, I think, difficult project to sort of spin up a local development environment for, just because it touches so many external services and it has several components that you have to know how they interrelate. So my first piece of advice is drop into CNCF Slack, get in the Argo contributors channel, and just say you're contributing, and open up a thread where you can ask questions and get past small blockers. Because I think that's where a lot of folks drop off. They clone the repo, they start diving into code, and they quickly realize, oh heck, there's a bunch of code gen stuff, a bunch of make targets that aren't immediately obvious when I need to run them. So just get in touch with the developers. Most of the problems can be resolved pretty quickly, and folks should be pretty responsive.
Yeah, that Slack channel is pretty useful, and people are pretty responsive there and answer questions. And you're right that it is, I think, uniquely difficult to work on because of the microservice nature of it. But I mean, that's the nature of the cloud native world is microservices. And so that's that's tricky to figure out. And in terms of what's coming up, is there anything that you're really excited about from a feature perspective?
Oh, feature perspective. It was funny when you mentioned talking about what's new in 2.7, because my brain is completely entered what's new in 2.8 mode.
Maybe what we should do is we should talk 2.7 and then we'll talk 2.8. That would make more sense, because if we do it in reverse, it'll be too wonky maybe. So in 2.7, and I'm going to pull up so we have a couple of updates. So this is a release that was led by, oh wait, I'm in the wrong, sorry, I'm just trying to pull up the window here. This was a release that was actually led by CodeFresh, and Pasha led this release. And Kostas put together the blog post back in March for the release candidate. I'm not sure that, I think all these features made it in, but we'll see if we as we go through them. So there is an enhanced pods log viewer, and I think in the past you couldn't follow it. You had to like refresh it over and over again. Does that sound right?
It was janky. So I think you could follow, but like the buttons weren't super intuitive, and it was, I don't know, it didn't behave the way I would expect. Yeah, Alex Collins hopped in and basically rewrote the pod logs viewer, which is funny because if you look in the contributors page that we were looking at with like the number of lines contributed, Alex Collins was on the project for like 6 months and was just prolific. That dude moves code like nobody's business. But he just popped in for 2.7 and did a bunch of work on the pod logs viewer because it had been bothering him, and I think made a lot of great improvements.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, he's coming from Argo workflows, and he was probably dealing with issues relating to getting the logs that he wanted from workflows. So it makes sense that he would want to work on it. Something else that is going on, well, with Customize, first off, I ran into the issue that Customize is moving to Customize 5. Let's see. So it's been on Customize 4, 5, 7. And we actually talked about this in a maintainers meeting, if we should put like a special like red notice on moving to Customize 5, because it breaks a lot of customized stuff. And I think the consensus was Customize breaks stuff all the time, so everybody should just expect that.
Yeah, I noticed we have a bunch of deprecation warnings in 5 for like Intuit internal repos. So I have like this 50,000 line PR where I ran customize edit fix on a bunch of stuff. It's going to be a little painful. Yeah.
Yeah, I think people are going to probably run into that as they upgrade, and they're not expecting it. We also have this override target namespace with Customize. This isn't a feature that I'm very familiar with. Is this specific to like the application namespace? We'll just override whatever the namespace is set as?
So the way application.spec.destination.namespace works is if your manifests don't have a namespace set, we'll go ahead and auto-populate it with that destination namespace. But if you have a customized repo where for whatever reason people have set namespace fields in resources, Argo CD respects those. The problem is if you're using someone else's customized manifest or something that you can't put up a PR against easily, whatever the case may be, you may want to ask Customize to go ahead and replace all those namespaces for you. And Customize has that feature. You just write it into customization.yaml. So this enhancement was just to add that namespace field to our application spec so that you can tell Customize, hey, I know what you have in the repo is all these namespaces. I want you to use this other one instead. Could be good for like PR environments, preview environments, where you just want to spin up a namespace quickly and then delete it after. It's kind of just a quality of life improvement for the customized support.
Yeah. Okay. So you basically, so it doesn't even have to be the destination. Yeah. It's not necessarily the destination namespace. You actually just get a customized namespace field. So you can just,
could be whatever.
Yeah. That's nice. Okay. Let's see. Argo CD UI extensions can now use a backend. Oh yeah. This is an interesting one because, all of the UI extensions basically had to, they couldn't, they had to be UI only. Basically.
Correct. They could access the Argo CD API. They could access anything that like your users could access without authorization. But if there's something that's behind auth, there was no way to have an extension pull data from it. So this fixed that.
So have you seen any cool use cases on this one yet?
I've heard of folks starting to build things based on it. I haven't heard many specifics. So Leo has spearheaded this particular feature, and I know that internally we're using it to show metrics for pods and rollouts in an extension tab. And we're just now getting that rolled out to all of Intuit. But I haven't heard much outside of that. I'd have to check with Leo.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, it seems like such a no-brainer to have, but being able to just pull in any other kind of backend, I mean, that's pretty nice. So yeah, definitely a great feature. Showing pod readiness gate errors in the Argo CD UI.
Yeah, I love this one. So Intuit uses a lot of readiness gates. If you want to find out whether a readiness gate is failing or not, previously you'd have to scroll down in this, in this page and look at the live manifests for the pod and like dig through the status.containers fields. This just does that work for you and shows a quick message. Hey, your readiness gate's not passing. That's why your pod's not receiving any traffic.
Yeah, anything that makes it easier to debug is very, very welcome. Improved filtering for label and resource selectors. You want to tell us about this one?
Oh, I barely remember this one. I know that I think people wanted to have not capabilities. And that's the main deal. Yeah, they wanted to be able to delete all apps that don't have a particular label, which was kind of a no-brainer. It was just an improvement on the glob patterns that we supported in the CLI, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole on glob recently, and I was surprised that it didn't seem like glob expressions were standardized. And as I was looking at glob expressions on different services, like they're literally just different. I was like, well, how come they're even called glob? They should be called by like whatever their specific service is. It would be nice if there was just like a universal literal glob spec, but I don't know if that exists.
Yes. Argo, like the Argo project in general, has two, in my mind, sort of language issues. We use different glob tools and we use different templating languages across the different Argo products. And I'm not sure that we clearly enough document where different tools are used. So I've got an open Argo CD issue saying, let's just standardize within Argo CD. We're going to use one glob language. And if we have to make breaking changes when we go to 3.0 to do that, let's do it. Let's just make sure if you're using a glob in Argo CD, you only have to look at one language documentation page.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I'm getting distracted now. There's some comments coming in. So Jonathan says people need to stop using the CLI anyway and just use a declarative approach. I mean, I don't disagree, but also like stuff like this, sometimes there's like manual operation stuff that you're doing to do like recovery. You know, like I've borked my Argo CD instances many times and needed to like go in and do something like this, do some imperative operations, different stuff. Though in general, it's like my go-to operation to fix Argo CD is to rebootstrap Argo CD and then just see if that fixes it. You know, that's like the first thing that I do. But yeah, I don't disagree with that. Christian's saying that on the namespace, going back to the customized namespace, he's saying that this does not respect auto create namespace in applications. So if you have a create namespace, he's saying that you can't, basically it won't work with this feature.
So I didn't bring my tinfoil hat, but I wish I had one handy. I have this conspiracy theory that once upon a time, create namespace really meant create namespaces. So whatever your resources referenced as a namespace, I think that the Argo CD controller used to create all of those namespaces for you. This is based on anecdotes I've seen in issues describing people's frustration that now it doesn't work that way. We will only create the namespace that is specified in spec.destination.namespace.
Okay.
I wish
so
it were
you
all
really
of them too.
Yeah. So you literally need, if you have this and destination namespace set, you'll be fine, but they need to match. You can't have like a separate, and I guess if you had like a multi-destination app or something, it wouldn't be able to work, but.
Exactly. If you need two namespaces, we're not going to create two of them for you. We just create the one.
That conspiracy may just be the latest example of the Mandela effect. There's an alternate reality where that's the case.
Yes, it may be. And they're slipping through in GitHub. GitHub is where the universes meet.
Yeah. Some of those people, they're clearly from the other universe. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So then going over to, all right, filtering, other notable changes. So there's actually quite a few, but we can run through these relatively rapid fire. Application sets will now preserve custom annotations. And I think this was an issue where, like, if you had annotations, they just wouldn't be carried over. They wouldn't be carried over by the templating engine. And I don't know if there's anything else now from the templating engine that's not carried over.
So
is that the last thing?
The general problem with the templating engine is that it only allows templating within strings. So if I want to, say, add 3 annotations, I can't like loop over a list of parameters from my generator and create those 3 annotations and then create 2 for a different application. That that's a bigger shortcoming of application sets that I'm planning to do some things to help fix soon, probably in 2.9. But this was sort of just a quick hack around. So you can just tell application set, please just leave my annotations alone if it's this list of annotations.
Okay. Got it. So there'll be more there, but not in 2.8, maybe in 2.9.
Probably 2.9. Yep.
Introduce a new annotation that will allow the application custom resource to skip the application controller's reconcile and processing. I remember this discussion, and it was like, it was not, this is distinct from ignore differences.
Yes, this is more radical than ignore differences. The reason Mike wanted this is he wants to run Argo CD in agent mode, which means the controller lives on the destination cluster. Argo CD doesn't natively support that. So what they did is they installed all of these agent controllers on destination clusters, and they have some process that goes and slurps up all of the applications from those external clusters, places them on a central cluster, and then like shows them in a central Argo CD UI as if they were all on the central cluster. The problem is if you're running Argo CD on that central cluster, it's going to be like, what the heck are all these application resources? And it's going to try to like actually reconcile them. So if you add that skip reconcile annotation, the central Argo CD just trusts whatever was pulled off of those external clusters and displays it as if they were local. I've also seen people use it to like disable reconciliation so that they can temporarily debug or something.
Yeah, it's an interesting feature, and I haven't used OCM, the Open Cluster Manager, that they put together, but it's pretty interesting use case, and I like this idea of these sort of split, you know, I don't know, inheritances, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, add a new sync option to control resource deletion on cascade deletion operations.
I don't remember that one at all, but good job, Shoma.
Me neither. I don't remember this guy. What is this feature?
Adsync Delete option. This is an old issue too, 7124.
Yeah.
Alex merged it. That's why I don't remember it.
Yeah. Well, if somebody else is familiar with that feature, feel free to call it out. Okay, this is one that I actually wanted to ask you about. So Tinny as an entry point. So Docker files, you typically have an entry point where you set that you want to run the binary with. I'm not familiar with Tinny. The thing that I flagged with this one was that you don't need to update your Argo CD manifest for 2.7, but for 2.8, the entry point will be removed, and you will need to update your manifest. So do you know what the story is with Tinny and why this is a value?
So I'm not super familiar with Tinny or 100% certain about the value it adds, but I know that across all of Argo CD's deployments and stateful sets, we like invoked our process in maybe 3 different unique ways. So part of this change was to standardize. I believe Tinny has the ability to like reap processes and shut down your container more cleanly. But that's the extent of my understanding of its value add.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. So for those, I don't know who would be affected by that. I guess if you were just using image updater to subscribe to Argo CD releases, this one will be fine in 2.7, but in 2.8, you will need to update your manifest. Otherwise, they literally won't start because the entry point will no longer be available.
The other thing is if you're using customized to monkey with the args or command fields in like Argo CD deployments or stateful sets, we are changing those fields so your patches may break. So like check that.
Okay, that's a good call out too. Let's see. Provide option to use internal endpoint when adding an external cluster. This is another one I'm not familiar with. Internal and this is another OCM one, isn't it?
Feels like it.
Because I think you basically can add a cluster that's on some kind of proxy, so it has like a local endpoint.
Yeah, this is another one that
yeah.
I wasn't tracking well.
Yeah, another open cluster
Oh,
feature.
cool.
So I really like that we're getting these features to support, these other third-party implementations and stuff. CLI Set Cluster command.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of just sort of missing things in the CLI. Like one command has the ability to do a set for this field, but another command doesn't. So I think this was one where folks were just trying to bring everything up to feature parity across all the CLI commands.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And then let's see. I don't necessarily want to go through all of these.
Just trying to think of, there's one more that I wanted to bring up.
Design was better. It's good.
There was a feature, so deep links were introduced in 2.6, if I remember correctly. There was an improvement where like there's more Argo CD resources that you can access when templating out those deep links, clusters and something else. So like it's now possible to make even richer deep links in your apps. I thought that was a particularly cool one.
Yeah, that's a nice feature. That's a great feature. Okay, so now I think we covered 2.7 pretty well. Obviously, there were a lot of bug fixes too, and I'm trying to think if there were any major bug fixes that were like that like blew my mind, but I don't think there was anything too crazy. Oh yeah, here's the deep links template you were talking about.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not familiar with this Helm change either. Resource policy annotation.
I saw something about this. I didn't review it though, so I'm also not familiar with it.
Oh, okay. So this is all right. So this is basically an existing Helm. You can mark a resource and basically mark it that it doesn't get deleted if the Helm chart gets deleted, and that'll automatically get translated to a delete fault sync option for that specific resource. So that's a nice little Helm improvement.
Yeah, because like a lot of the complaints with Argo CD and Helm are, well, Helm supports X, Y, and Z, but Argo CD only supports X and Y, and I never really know which ones. So yeah, getting closer to 100% support is dope.
Yeah, great. Now, talking about the future here then for a minute. So we've been talking about Helm and Helm support and changing. So for those that don't know, if you're using Argo, all manifest generation is basically treated the same. We generate the manifest in Argo repo server, and then we do essentially the equivalent of a kubectl apply on the manifests that are rendered. It's done via the API, so it's not a command line execution or anything. But that means that for Helm, there are certain Helm hooks that won't work. So like Helm test doesn't work. And any Helm hooks that exist have to be translated to Argo hooks in order to operate. So you can do you can have Helm install hooks, and those get set up as I think like pre-sync hooks or something like that within Argo. But that also means you don't get a Helm release created, because we don't create that Helm release. And it also means you can't do value lookups, which is kind of a security feature as well, because that means Argo doesn't have access to pull values from the server during manifest rendering, which could be a security issue, and does open up some additional things. But so there are some things that are missing that people maybe want this sort of native Helm support, and we've talked about a few different ways of implementing that. And basically, they boil down to having probably a dedicated controller and probably impersonation to handle security. Is that something that you see us doing in the project anytime soon?
Something like that will happen soon. There are kind of 2, maybe 3 different ways this might happen. So there's an upstream change, a PR in Helm to add lookup support to the Helm template command. In the past, they've just been like, we're not going to let you do lookups with Helm template. Helm template is meant to be a completely offline tool. But they've expanded that now. They're hopefully going to merge this PR soon, which lets us run Helm template, generate the manifests, and also do lookups. But then you run into the security problem.
I think that it's a Helm install dry run is the way it's going to work.
So I think it'll be both. At one point, the Helm maintainer said, we don't want this at all on the Helm template command. We want it just Helm install dry run, which would have meant we would have to figure out how to get Argo CD to run that command, pull the manifests off, and then use them.
Yeah.
But the latest version of the PR adds that dry run flag to the template command as well. So it may be super easy for us to start using it.
Yeah, I mean, if they add it to the template command, you can just plug it in and you'll get all the live values. And then I think if we used that and then we passed it into the Kubernetes API, that we would actually get a Helm release list. We'd be able to do like a Helm list on a server and see the charts. Is that right?
I'm not actually sure where Helm persists releases. Is it as a CRD, or in the past, I think it may have been like a database.
Yeah, in the past, it was definitely a like config map. Okay. And now I believe it's a custom resource. But when you do like a Helm template, it doesn't generate those, so you can't apply them.
Right. I think theoretically we could like generate that, get that, apply it to the cluster. Jan says
in secrets. Jan is paying attention. Thank you.
I'm not sure that I want to maintain that. I think that it's reasonable to ask users, when you start using Argo CD, you're free to use your Helm charts, but you're going to be using the CLI and the UI that Argo CD provides in order to maintain those. The Helm CLI provides a bunch of functionality that may even kind of conflict with GitOps methodology. Mm-hmm. It is a nice convenience, but I'm not sure that it's worth it to support that if it means a lot of changes in the Argo CD code base.
No, I wouldn't. I would agree. I agree with that. I mean, if it's just a matter of, hey, we add this flag to the rendering and it will generate those secrets now, then sure, why not? But if it requires any extra overhead, because it's not like maintaining those is important for the operation, like for the way that people are using Argo CD today, it's not important. Yeah, so I think that one's interesting. There's another proposal that is currently making its way through the progress that we've discussed with Andrew Block. Shout out to Andrew Block, who's probably traveling somewhere right now because that's all he does. He travels everywhere. But this is to support OCI as a source of truth, and I'll throw this back up here. This proposal basically would create a native OCI support. So for those that aren't aware, OCI artifacts, Docker is an example, like containers are an example of an OCI artifact. It's basically just a spec for storing essentially a tarball. And so one of the patterns that we've seen arise in other tools and not in Argo CD is to point at a OCI bundle that includes just Kubernetes manifests. And so there's this pattern that we've started to see where people will basically render their manifests during a CI process or whatever, bundle them, version them, and push them to an OCI repository like Docker Hub. And then you can pull that out and extract the manifest, and they've been versioned. You have basically treating the entire manifest set as a bundle, as a binary.
Yeah, I think this will be a huge feature, just in terms of impact. As far as the actual code goes, I don't think it'll be too bad. So we support OCI artifacts now for Helm because we were able to sort of take advantage of the support that Helm already provided. But now we want to do it for like customize directories, plugins, JSON-it. So we need to add a third client. Right now we have the Helm client, we've got the Git client, And throughout our code, we call those clients to do the getting of the resources, then actually passing them to the tools to generate manifests. We just need to add a third client and provide some mechanism to toggle to use that client when the user is trying to pull an OCR artifact. It sounds fairly simple. I think the code will be fairly simple, but it takes a lot of time to test. So it may be a little while before we get that support in.
Yeah, one of the things that Andrew talked about was that within OCI, there's not necessarily there needs to be kind of a media type that expresses the structure of what's in this tarball, so that we know where to find the manifest and stuff like that. And there's not currently, as far as I know, a standard around that. But overall, I mean, I do like this idea because there are a lot of teams that are used to working this way. I mean, they're coming from, a world where they manage binaries. And so thinking of your manifests as a binary, I don't see a big downside to that. It seems reasonable. And then you could subscribe to, rather than, well, let's take the example of 2.7 to 2.8. Because of our removal of entry point, if you're just subscribed to the image updates, you will have a failure when you try to upgrade to 2.8. But if you had these kind of bundled manifests or something, then you wouldn't have that issue. Now, I use customize to kind of do this today, right? So like I just point at upstream customize. I mean, I usually use Argo CD autopilot, which also just points at upstream Argo CD. So I will get the manifest, updates. That's one of the reasons I do it. But that doesn't like that customized chain is sometimes difficult to work with because it's not like standalone. It's not like you can like you're like I'm gonna do a customized build. I don't really know all the stuff that's upstream of this, and vice versa. I can be making changes to a customized base layer and not really know what's going to happen downstream because I don't know how many customizations rely on it.
I think one of the biggest wins we'll get from OCI support is all the supply chain stuff that already exists for images. So if you want to use Helm, I don't think there are great ways to like verify a signature on a Helm chart. Just because it hadn't been written for that. With Git, you've got kind of the Git specific tools for verifying commit veracity and checking, basically that the code you actually got is the code that someone committed. But then you have to do all that stuff that's just for Git. If you're using OCI, you use whatever you're already using to check your images and just apply it to manifests as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point. From a supply chain security standpoint, I can run a cosign on any OCI artifact. So technically I could do it on a Helm chart today. I haven't tried to do it on a Helm chart specifically, but I think it would work. But to be able to do it on just a bundled set of manifests, and now you have a signature and you have an attestation and you have, you can throw S-bombs in there if you want. You can do all kinds of interesting stuff now that you can sign it. That's pretty nice. Jan has a correction for us. So he says Helm can use different storage drivers. Default in Helm 3 is secrets, but config map and SQL are also supported. Thank you, Jan.
Cool. Yeah, one last quick note on OCI. Andrew Block has already written like Argo CD CLI commands to create and push OCI artifacts using what will be our standard format. So like that part's done. We just have to actually write the code to pull it in Argo CD now.
Yeah. So I think that'll be a really cool feature when we get there. So now that we've covered 2.7, we've covered some future stuff. What do you think? What's happening in 2.8, and where should people look for what's happening in 2.8? Like we have a roadmap and we have like a release milestone, but it's not necessarily obvious.
Sorry, my stream just went out. My internet is not exactly perfect quality. But 2.8, the best place to look for what's coming is the projects board for Argo CD. So if you go to the Argo CD repo, at the top, there's a link to projects, and then we have a project called Argo CD Roadmap. and there's a 2.8 column and a bunch of stuff sitting in that column describing what we hope to complete for 2.8, and some of it we've already finished.
Yeah, and these obviously aren't guaranteed, and basically until we get a release candidate, that's when we'll do a feature freeze typically. And so sometimes, like I've seen features slip between like 2 versions before, where it was hopes to get in, and then it slipped one version, and then it slipped the next version. But what are you excited about in 2.8 right now?
2.8 to me feels like the release of application sets improvements. There are a few things that I was excited to see make it in. One of the main ones is application set controller no longer keeps its own cache of resources from Git. That's important because the application set controller has been kind of notorious for chewing through Git rate limits. Its cache code was not in great shape. So now instead it uses the repo server. So we've centralized our caching code for Git access. So that's kind of a behind the scenes.
Yeah, that'll be a pretty significant performance improver for a lot of people.
Yeah, if you're trying to scale application sets, that's huge. A couple other things. One is plugin generator. So we've had a lot of folks who are like, hey, this generator does 95% of what I want it to do, but I need a tweak. And that small change doesn't make sense for the community, so we can't help them. Someone implemented plugin generator, which just means you define your REST API, you make it available to the application set controller, and then all of the generating of parameters is up to you. You just hand back a list of parameters and we'll create your applications for you. So that's going to unblock a lot of use cases which either are too slow to move upstream or just don't make sense to have upstream. Yeah, and then you've got another one, AWS code commit support. Yeah,
that's interesting. I haven't used AWS code commit. I think this is their Git competitor, right? Their version control system. So that'll be nice to have support there. Have a question from Jural. I hope the released version will stay maintained as we use simple fetch for upgrades.
I'm not sure what simple fetch means in
this
context. I think we may have lost the context for that question. You may have to re-ask.
He sent me curl raw GitHub Argo project version manifest HA. Oh, so I think he's saying that he still wants to use like customize to build his manifest. I don't know.
So the raw, you're using the built raw YAML, and then maybe using customize to apply overlays. Yep, that'll exist forever.
Yeah, that's not going anywhere. It's honestly like Argo has been kind of a customized first project,
which is funny considering just how popular the Argo CD Helm chart is. I forget the main site that people go to get Helm charts. But Argo CD is like ranked in the top 5 most popular there. It's a really good chart.
Yeah, it's not an official chart. It's and I had somebody say the other day, they said, well, there is no official chart for Argo CD. So, I've been nervous about it. And I was like, well, yeah, but there's like one that everyone uses.
It has the official badge now. And honestly, I think personally, I'm happy to start calling it the official chart because Argo Helm lives in ArgoProj on GitHub. It's considered a top level project. So even though like the Argo CD core maintainers don't produce a Helm chart that is our chart, there's a team that's dedicated just to making that chart happen. I think
it is marked as official now. You're right. I mean, it is technically the community chart, but it is now marked as official. So I think it's
official in my heart. So
we can call it. Christian also wanted to call out that the plugin generator is going to be a game changer.
Yeah, and I wanted to connect it back to AWS code commit. So someone put up the AWS code commit PR. I read it as best I could. It kind of made sense. The problem is I don't know anything about AWS code commit. There could be problems. I think that PRs like this will become community maintained plugin generators. And they won't have to wait for me to figure out like how AWS interprets certificate files that are from this particular, I don't know, domain registrar or whatever weird problems will come up. They can just fix the problem for themselves.
So to be clear, this one is not using generators, but the plugin generator, the ability to basically move these things into plugins is going to make it so that people don't have to open up pull requests. AWS can just maintain their own plugin, and we've seen that be successful with some other projects. I know that in Argo rollouts, we recently we built support for Gateway API so that you can use Gateway API, but that's a plugin because Argo rollouts allows that, and so it just exists as its own plugin and is maintained separately, which is better as far as I'm concerned.
And Zach hit basically the same question. You know, we've got open PRs to support X, you know, vendor. Do we ask them to write a plugin or do we just merge what they've written? In this case, AWS code commit, a lot of work had already gone into it. It's fine. We merge it. But then the next one is a plugin.
Yeah, hopefully. So we do have a question. What about AppSet Webhook? It's kind of non-functional. Any updates on that?
I don't know specifically how it's non-functional, but it doesn't surprise me that it has issues. I think even the Argo CD application controller webhook has significant issues. Those are, again, kind of difficult to debug because they are, you know, they're vendor specific. You have, in order to test it, you have to have a payload from GitHub or whatever SCM you're dealing with. And then you got to reproduce the issue and fix it. I think that it's possible there's not heavy enough use of that particular webhook in like one of the core maintainers companies to get dev time on it. I know that Intuit doesn't have dev time for me on that particular issue. So it may be a while before that gets resolved. I'm happy to work with people to get a PR up and get it fixed, but for the moment, I have no help for you there.
I think the issue was that like there were certain webhooks that wouldn't trigger reconciliation of application sets. Is that what it is? Yeah, and we had this conversation actually with somebody who said, you know, you have a lot of issues with application sets that basically boil down to it being different than applications. And who was it? They suggested, they're like, what if Argo just implemented its own Git repository that it just generated stuff into, and then you had applications read off of that? And they were like, that would solve problems. I thought that was so funny because it was like using a sledgehammer to smash a fly, you know? It was like, that would solve that problem. You know, it might also smash a hole through the table.
I thought it was kind of cool. I forget the specifics, but it felt like the idea was you implement the Git interface, basically whatever API Git uses to respond to fetches. And then you just generate that at runtime, and you generate, here are my application manifests at runtime, and pretend you're Git. So you build an app of apps where your Git source is pretending to be Git, but it's really just the application set controller, which is kind of cool.
It's kind of the way that Flux works. Flux doesn't create a fake Git, but basically they don't do any transformations and everything gets pushed directly into Git. So you basically are like, you don't have, I mean, they just announced a concept of that's very similar to application sets. So I'll see, you know, how that works, but because they added generators and stuff. But in the past, it's been use CI/CD, use automation, generate that stuff however you want, and write the manifest to Git, which does allow you to bypass some of the stuff. But it also means you have a Git repo that is like a lot more complex than it really needs to be.
You've got imperative pipelines that break, and now you have to have alerting for that. And
it's really nice. I mean, application sets just as a feature, and like using a pull request generator, you know, it's really easy. You don't have to have a startup time for a pipeline or anything like that. That's a pretty fantastic use case. Anything else that you're looking forward to in 2.8?
Oh, I wrote down stuff. Let me see what I wrote down. So one big one that was huge for Intuit, we're turning on gzip compression in Redis by default. So at Intuit, we were seeing high inter-AZ network traffic costs because Redis is constantly chatting across its instances to keep everything in sync, to give you a high availability Redis instance. That traffic's expensive. And when nothing is compressed, it's very expensive. So we enable gzip compression. It's going on by default in 2.8. Most people won't see anything happen. Some people will see massive network cost savings.
Yeah, that's pretty rad. I mean, seems like a no-brainer. And I think the compute overhead added by using gzip compression is very minimal.
Negligible. At least that's what we saw at Intuit. Maybe someone will see an increase, but looked fine.
I'd be surprised if you guys didn't see an issue with it. Then I'd be surprised if someone else did.
Yeah,
that is one of the nice things about so the way that CodeFresh architects, we use a lot more instances of Argo CD. We basically we built our control plane. That's part of our enterprise offering, and so for us to have many Argo CD instances, so like we have hosted Argo CD, right? Each of those users gets their own Argo CD instance. They're all V-clustered. It's all, so, it's just spread out. So sometimes there are scale issues that we don't really run into necessarily, just because of our approach is basically treat Argo CD as a swarm, whereas Intuit is a lot more centralized. You guys basically have a couple very large instances to manage stuff.
Yeah, we kind of have a lot of instances. We've got around 50, but it does come down to like 2 or 3 really big ones. A bunch of them are just not very big, and we have zero scalability issues. But there are a few that we hit scalability issues pretty regularly and are constantly stamping them out and trying to upstream the fixes.
Yeah. Well, that's nice, because that means that you run into it, usually before a lot of our big scale users. Though I think we had we were doing some scale checks at Argo at GitOps Con when I was there in Vancouver, and we had somebody who was like, "We've got 15,000 clusters under management under a single Argo CD instance." That was like, "Oh, I want to hear more about that use case." That was that's a lot. It's a lot of clusters to have in one Argo CD.
I want to see that Argo CD instance, because that's a lot.
And I don't remember. I think they actually gave a talk at GitOps Con, but I think they might have misspoke too, because I seem to recall that when I actually got to their talk, it was like 1,500, which was like, oh, okay, well, it's more.
Still a lot, but yeah.
This hurts. Jonathan says, any word on using Sparse Checkout for fetching code from Git? We use monorepo and it's not a problem yet, but maybe in the future. I did create the issue for this, and I said I will work on that, and that was 8 months ago. It's not hard. I just haven't had time to mess with it. And I think if anybody feels strongly about it, they could go and add this, because it's basically just adding a flag and passing it in to repo server. So I don't think it's difficult technically to do.
There's one thing that might make it slightly difficult. We share, different apps share the same cached Git repo on the repo server. So if we do a sparse checkout for one app and it pulls down directory A, and then we go to pull down directory B for app B, I don't know enough about Git to know precisely how that works. I think it may also mean that you have to disable concurrency. Because it's possible when you pull down a Git repo, you can have 2 different apps generating manifests off it at the same time, because they're not making any write operations. They're not changing any of the contents of the repo. But if you're doing 2 sparse checkouts, you might have app A delete your directory out from under app B just as it's trying to generate its manifests. So it might get a little tricky.
Point. We don't create isolation on Git checkouts anyway. So like if I have a Git repo that 2 apps are calling, it only checks out the repo once, right? It doesn't
Correct.
create like a different separate folder. So to prevent collisions on sparse checkout, I guess there's two ways you can do it. Either with sparse checkout, so you can have sparse checkout check out multiple directories and stuff. So you basically just have it be additive. So basically every app would just add additional, components to the sparse checkout, or you have it basically act as its own. So you create some sort of isolation. So it basically acts as its own repo in each one. So they do it independently. But I guess it seems like the second one may not be as good, because if you have a common dependency in both, you get more efficiency by doing it the first way. Would probably be the play.
I think I'd go with option number 3, just take out a lock. We already have a locking mechanism for if you're operating on 2 different revisions. Because obviously if the revision's different, the code's different, you got to make sure you're not building manifests off of one revision when you need 2. I would just take out a lock. It is a slight performance hit, but I think we can tackle the concurrency performance hit when we run into issues. But good news about actually getting the code written. Someone DM'd me 9 o'clock yesterday and was like, I've started writing code for this. Can you help me?
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, even better. Okay. So Jonathan, it sounds like somebody's actually taken on the task to work on it. So I wouldn't expect necessarily in 2.8, but maybe 2.9, depending on how much progress they make.
Yeah, I think 2.9's got a pretty good shot.
Right now, I've seen that the workaround for a lot of users has been either removing binaries from monorepos, because that's oftentimes the case. And the more common workaround that I've seen people do is basically having an automation process that generates a second repo with the subset of stuff. And that's actually similar to what Intuit does, just so you can do diffing, I think.
Yeah, we do generate manifests. So we don't like push to a new repo, we push to a new branch.
New branch, okay.
Yeah, we monitor the master branch, then we generate each environment. So we have different customized directories for each environment. Then we push that to environment-specific branches as just a flat file.
Yeah, okay. So similar, but I guess if you wanted to avoid, I mean, you could have a branch that's empty. But I don't know if you could start a new branch, clear everything, and then remove the history so that it doesn't have, so you don't need shallow clone. Because that's the other feature that people wanted in association with this was shallow clone, where they have just a very, very long history and they're trying to avoid pulling it. And that's shallow clone is kind of a lot of people think, oh, well, if I shallow clone, it'll be really quick. But when caching is taken into account, shallow cloning usually ends up being less performant.
Yep.
Let's see. We got another comment. This one's from Blake Peterson. I guess another issue is that it'll make the goal of having a distro-less Argo CD container more difficult, since sparse checkout partial clones only exist in the Git, as opposed to it being implemented in a library such as GoGit. That's a good point as well. I think GoGit doesn't have sparse checkout. Maybe we need them to initiate it first.
I hope that distroless doesn't end up requiring switching over from the binary to just the library, because I think that that's going to be a lot of work. I think maybe someone was able to build a statically linked Git binary. There's a big long thread in an Argo CD issue about distroless containers. We'll see. I think that's a few releases away.
Dang, this is one of those features that seemed so easy on the surface, but once we actually got into it, it's a little bit of a rat's nest.
I'm going to mispronounce his name. Dan Lorink from ChainGuard. He sometimes gets what he calls nerd sniped into tackling particularly difficult distroless pushes. I'm curious if we can tempt him. Negative on the statically linked Git. Yeah.
Yeah, he says no static. Blake says no statically linked Git. Understood. Well, somebody's working on it.
We do a pretty decent job of keeping the CVEs down in like the Ubuntu based image. So I don't think it's a huge problem yet, but it'll be nice when we get distroless.
Yeah, awesome. So talking about features now, and we've had a pretty good discussion on that. Let's shift over and talk a little about the security posture as a project, and then so we established the SIG security, I think, a year and a half ago when we were on the road to graduation, and since then we've had a reasonable number of CVEs reported, and we've been able to issue patches, and we still have some that are maybe take longer than I would like, but overall, I think the biggest improvement that I've seen was actually coming from Blake Peterson, wasn't it? That he worked on a lot of the supply chain security stuff. Who was it that added signing to all of the images in the Argo project? Was that Blake?
I think Justin added.
Oh yeah, Justin Marquis
signing. Yeah. So Justin Marquis just kind of showed up during the CNCF security slam, I guess about a year ago, and just started doing stuff. Started implementing not just the basic like security, supply chain security changes that you want in an open source product, but like reading the new Salsa spec and implementing Salsa level 3 before the spec was even at 1.0. So we got.
I think Argo is the first CNCF project to meet Salsa 3.
We might be like number 2 or 3. I think maybe Spiffy got in before us at Salsa level 3. Chain Guard did, I think, 2 certifications, and we were the second one. Which basically means Chain Guard showed up, they looked at our repo, asked us about how we build things, and said, yep, that's also level 3. Yeah, it's hard. Justin went hardcore mode on our supply chain security, and now he's going to apply the same changes to Argo rollouts and Argo events. Argo workflows might be difficult. They've got a pretty complex build setup.
Yeah, but I think is Argo workflows still, do they have signing now?
I think they signed their release assets. I don't know if it's like just images, just binaries, or both.
It is nice that we have co-signed support for Argo CD, Argo rollouts now. That's pretty valuable from a supply chain perspective. And
it's so the sort of hardcore mode that Justin went with is not just generating like signatures, but generating provenance plus attestations. And all this is so new and it gets mixed up in my head. But basically what it means is GitHub itself issues us a short-lived token, and GitHub builds an attestation that says this was built on our hardware at this time using this source code, and it hasn't been tinkered with. And as long as you trust GitHub, then you can trust that nobody changed the code, and that this is precisely what was built. Which is
the short-lived tokens are specific to our repo, I believe. So you can tie it back to the correct repo and everything. So you can't spoof it from like another GitHub account or whatever. And that's a pretty cool feature.
Yeah.
Well, as we come to the end, we've talked about what was new in 2.7. We talked about your experience as a maintainer. We talked about what's coming in 2.8. We talked about some other approaches to different problems. Obviously, if there's any questions from the comments, feel free to shoot those up. Anything else that we should talk about, Michael, as we come to a close? Anything that you've got going on that you want to call attention to? You want people to follow you on Twitter, crenshaw.dev?
Yeah, follow me on Twitter, crenshaw.dev. I don't say much, but it's nice to see what people are up to. I'll follow you back. I'm a particularly bad hype man when it comes to software. I find boring extremely exciting. So like what excites me most about Argo CD right now is the fact that we're moving bug fixes, we're moving, UI tweaks to make the user experience better. Just small stuff, but stuff that makes it so the user experience just works and is really excellent from day one. We're working on making it easier for contributors to become like officially part of the Argo project and get to a point where they can actually smash merge on PRs. We're working on scoped approvers. So right now in
Yeah.
Argo CD, if you get the merge button, you can merge any PR. We want to make it to where folks can merge docs PRs and not have to be full on Argo CD contributors. So I think that's going to be really exciting. We're going to pull more people into open source and, you know, get them started.
Yeah, shout out to Nick Morey, who I think will probably be our first scoped approver. We'll see. We'll see.
Yep,
We got
I'm
to get
excited
it
about
out.
that.
Something that Jonathan brought up is he would love it if we leaned into Argo workflows as a CI tool and ties into Argo CD when managing it declaratively. GitHub Actions outage hurt me almost daily. This is an interesting one because so CodeFresh, you know, we launched Argo workflows as CI and hosted and built a bunch of tooling around it. And it's used heavily by our users who need lots of scale. So if they're like, hey man, we need to use like 1,000 GPUs during this workflow execution, Argo workflows is really the only game in town to support something like that. So that's where we've seen it be really successful. But for people that are doing build, test, deploy, people seem to find it too complex because it's like managing events and event sources and stuff. Even with CodeFresh, where there's like kind of a wizard that does a lot of it for you, most people end up using either CodeFresh CI/CD, which is been around for years, or they use GitHub Actions just because of the simplicity of it. We actually brought up a while ago, you know, Argo CD originally used Argo workflows as a CI tool. And it was just from a hosting perspective, from a cost perspective, it's easier for us as a CNCF project to get free minutes from GitHub Actions than it is to get compute time. So that was part of the motivation to move to GitHub Actions. But I feel you, man. I don't disagree.
So Jonathan, I think Jonathan knows he's, you know, saying something that I strongly agree with. If you catch me at a conference, I will rant for a while about how I think that Argo Workflows is already an excellent CI tool. I built at my last job, I helped build an Argo Workflows CI pipeline and maintained it for like 30, 40, 50 devs. Argo Workflows has some issues that are keeping it from being, in my mind, 100% CI ready. And some of those issues were documented by Alex Collins in a GitHub issue on the Argo Workflows repo. He basically has a checklist. Here are some user experience improvements that we need to get Argo Workflows sort of on the GitHub Actions usability level. One thing that I'm not sure is listed that I feel strongly about is we need folks to develop Argo Workflows executor plugins. I think that CodeFresh uses heavily workflow templates. So you've got some common activity you want to do. You want to push a Slack notification, PagerDuty notification, et cetera. Just really simple little tasks that every company is going to want to do. But you have to write this workflow template. And if you want to add a feature or you want to fix a bug, someone has to go and update the workflow template. Like hundreds of companies have to go and update this thing. If you use an executor plugin, instead, you change one thing. You change the version number, just like you do with any other dependency, just like you do with GitHub Actions. You could configure Dependabot to update the plugin version in your manifests. Then you would just have the Argo Workflows Slack plugin, and that would have all the features. You get new features when people contribute them. I'm not sure that quite good enough yet to really get people developing them. I'm not sure that people know about them enough to really be developing them.
Well, and I think there's even just a simplification.
One of them, yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think there's even just a simplification of the spec and the events and stuff that is maybe keeping it from the mass adoption that it's capable of, because the underlying technology is very capable.
Yep. I wrote a couple of executor plugins just as proof of concept. One to integrate with Argo CD and generate diffs and write them to your pull requests. Another one to interact with GitHub and actually push the comment to GitHub. And it was a little tricky to write. Like, it's a relatively new feature, but it wasn't bad. And I could totally imagine, a big company deciding we want a Slack plugin and just maintaining it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we're pretty much at time. So thank you for coming again, Michael, and talking shop, and telling people. Obviously, follow me at crenshaw.dev on Twitter. It's been awesome to have you, and I appreciate you sharing all of your wisdom with us.
Yeah, thanks for chatting with me, Dan. It's been a lot of fun.
So for those that are new to the stream, couple call to actions. First of all, upcoming, we've got this is a whole new season of GitOps the Planet. Next week, we're going to be talking about eBPF with Liz Rice. On June 28th, we've got building open source communities with Atai Shakuri. We've got July 5th. We're going to be doing GPT. We're going to be talking about Kate's GPT and using it to improve Kubernetes operations with Alex Jones. July 12th, SLOs, software delivery, Noble 9, Kit Merker, one of the original product managers on Kubernetes. And then July 26th, ditching old and busted CI/CD with Kat Cosgrove. So we've got an all-star cast coming up. As always, if you haven't done it already, go get GitOps certified. This is the best, the most popular, the fastest growing GitOps certification on the planet. You can find it at learning.codefresh.io. We have 2 levels: a basic level, which includes the basic level includes how to do canary releases. This is the fundamentals. Fundamentals will show you how to set up everything to do canary releases, blue-green deployments, using Argo rollouts, doing everything GitOps first, figuring out how to do that. And then GitOps at scale, going to show you how to strategies for organizing your repositories, using application sets, getting deeper into sync windows and all these kinds of things. So go and do these certifications. They are the most popular, and their cost is very low. I mean, if you do them as a bundle, it's like 20% off. And this is just because the cost is really just to cover the environments that we use, so you can do this stuff in a very straightforward, easy way. So with that, we're going to sign off. Obviously, catch us next week where we're going to be talking eBPF. Thanks, everybody. We're out.